You guys have lit it up on social media. I'll be joining you shortly. Outnumbered. There it is at the bottom of the screen across all platforms. I'm going to pop up in just a minute or so to get in the conversation. Thank you for watching Overtime. I'm Harris. Here's Dana.
Fox News Alert, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders set to take the podium moments from now on a very busy news day. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. Sarah Sanders is expected to take questions on a variety of topics, including the president's tweets and the Supreme Court's ruling. The High Court decided in favor of a Colorado baker who refused to make a custom wedding cake for a same-sex couple. The justices ruling 7-2 for Jack Phillips, finding the Colorado Civil Rights Commission failed to respect his right to freedom of religion. And you're in for a treat because Shannon Bream is here with us. She's the chief legal correspondent and anchor of a great show, Fox News at Night, and she is here in Washington, or she's there in Washington with all the latest for us. Shannon.
Hi, Dana. Well, yes, this decision was 7-2, but it's important to note that the majority's opinion may be more narrow than it appears at first blush when you see those headlines. Writing for the majority, Justice Kennedy pegged the decision in favor of the Christian baker on comments from commissioners in Colorado who heard the case first. One of those commissioners likened the baker's religious freedom claim to people who'd use the same reasoning to support slavery and the Holocaust, even calling it, quote, a despicable piece of rhetoric to rely on religious freedom as a basis for the decision. Well, Kennedy wrote this, quote, this sentiment is inappropriate for a commission charged with the solemn responsibility of fair and neutral enforcement of Colorado's anti-discrimination law. It is important to note that Kennedy suggested more broadly the legal issues in this case are not exactly over. He said future disputes will have to be resolved with tolerance, without disrespecting sincere religious beliefs, and, quote, without subjecting gay persons to indignities when they seek goods and services in an open market. So, Dana, I would stay tuned for another big case within the next couple of years on this.
Right. They didn't really solve it, at least not in the minds of a lot of people. On another topic, the president talking about on Twitter this morning whether he could pardon himself. He says yes. What does the law say?
Well, he and his team assert that he can. They're looking at Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution. It says this: the president shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. That leads us to the next twist in the conversation. The president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, brought it up this weekend, saying he believes the president does have the power to pardon himself. Both Giuliani and the president say he's never going to have to because he's done nothing wrong. But Giuliani admits that kind of pardon would, quote, be unthinkable, and it would be problematic because it would almost certainly trigger impeachment proceedings. Now, one thing that legal scholars seem to agree on is that a pardon does not beat an impeachment, meaning lawmakers are always going to have a way to remove a president, a judge, anyone else subject to impeachment, even if that person has received a presidential pardon. They are two different things, Dana.
All right, well, that makes sense. All right, Shannon Bream, thank you for joining us today.
Of course.
And next I have the former Justice Department prosecutor we all know and love. James Trusty is here for us. I remember a few weeks ago there was a similar question along these lines, and I asked you, what about the president and X, Y, or Z? And you said, well, the Supreme Court has actually never even dealt with that. It is not settled law. In your opinion, when the president's talking about all these scholars that say that he can pardon himself, is he correct?
Well, Dana, it hasn't changed in the last few weeks. It's a situation where whether the founding fathers anticipated this exact issue or not, we'll never know. People can read into the silence of Article 2 in either direction, and no case has ever had to deal with this issue. No court has ever had to deal with this issue. So whether it was Andrew Johnson or Bill Clinton or Richard Nixon, nobody has gotten to this level where they have their lawyers talking about the possibility of self-pardon. And again, not shockingly, sometimes lawyers disagree, and you've got lawyers on both sides of this issue.
Right. Well, and it's also certainly just so hypothetical right now that that's not even there. But what might be a little bit closer is something that the president has been talking about as well, and his lawyer Rudy Giuliani talking about it, which is in regards to a subpoena and if the president would have to respond to that. Listen to Judge Andrew Napolitano on it earlier today.
In a criminal investigation, your executive privilege is radically narrowed to diplomatic secrets, military secrets, and sensitive national security secrets. Everything else, you have to cough up, whether by documents or testimony, just like anybody else. Why Mayor Giuliani and why the writers of this 20-page letter, which is now 6 months old, overlooked this ruling, which is the governing, controlling ruling in the case, is beyond me.
So this actually is something I think that Rudy Giuliani's been talking a little bit more about. He says his client, the president, does want to take questions from Robert Mueller. You and other lawyers have said, I don't think that would be a good idea, not what you would advise your client. But at the end of the day, the client is going to decide what the client decides. On this issue of being compelled to testify, has that been settled by the courts?
Well, I think the judge is right that on the grounds of executive privilege, it's very narrowly drawn, kind of favors the ability of the chief executive to not talk about national security issues that should remain private. So you don't have the ability to completely walk away from this subpoena, but that doesn't mean you can't fight it. And I think that the Giuliani team could certainly file motions to quash or to dismiss the subpoena that could get some traction. They could very much challenge the investigation, its motivations, how long and expensive it's been. They could have a very publicly available document that they would file to try to get rid of this subpoena. And what's interesting is the government might still be constrained by what's called Rule 6, which means grand jury secrecy, where their responses are actually under lock and key. So you could have a very one-sided debate in public while a very private and more legal-based debate is taking place in front of a judge.
So then who does that favor, if it's a public debate versus a secret debate?
Well, if it's a public debate and you're the only side swinging publicly, it's going to be pretty nice, right? So I would think that the White House team, Team Giuliani, would be able to frame the issue in a way that's favorable to their client and get that document out publicly, and it would say a lot. They could really be very expansive in terms of attacking the bona fides of Team Mueller.
Interesting. All right. Let me ask you then about the second thing. June is always a month where the Supreme Court gives us a lot of these decisions. This issue about the cake baker has been one that people were hoping that there would be some clarity on the issue. The ruling was 7-2, which is not narrow, as some had described it, but it actually was a decision that was actually fairly narrow and doesn't answer all of the questions. How did you read it?
I think that's right. I mean, the bottom line, Dana, is Justice Kennedy is very obviously grappling with two competing notions: the tension between making people be respectful of those who they may differ with, of the government making people more tolerant, but also the government not railroading deeply held religious beliefs. And so that's the tension, and everybody was looking to see if this cake case was going to kind of decide which ones of those competing interests wins, and it really doesn't, because the case comes down to very much its own facts. Justice Kennedy goes overboard, saying time and time again, you know, everyone needs to be treated with dignity. This is a very limited ruling, and it really is. I mean, it's basically acknowledging there's going to be a lot more cases that come down the pike before we really have any deeper sense of where that divide lies, how that tension gets resolved.
So, but in your mind, do you think that the Supreme Court ruled that on behalf of proponents of what would be called religious liberty in that argument?
Well, mildly so, but again, it's really not as much of a big policy call as it was limited by the facts. The facts of the case included the fact that the commission, the government, was very heavy-handed, where they were very dismissive of religious beliefs from the get-go, where they were somewhat hypocritical. They ruled in favor of a baker who refused to have anti-gay slurs on his cakes. So at the end of the day, the court basically said, look, you're being inconsistent when you respect moral convictions. You are wanting to have your cake and eat it too, and we don't respect that in terms of the First Amendment allowing governments to act that way.
One last question, then. We only have about 45 seconds left. There are rumors in Washington, D.C., and I'm up here in New York, so you tell me if you've heard these rumors, that Justice Kennedy is thinking of retiring, and that announcement could even come before the end of this month. That would be significant for the court, for President Trump, for Americans everywhere. What do you think might happen?
Well, I think there's more rumors about the Caps game tonight, but down here. But I do think that it's fair game to start speculating about a number of justices. There has been talk about Justice Kennedy historically. I don't have any sort of inside track to that, but he's been a swing vote on a lot of important cases. And so I think it'll be a very important moment if he decides to step down and we go through this process with the president nominating someone who can get through the Senate. It's going to be, no matter what the bona fides, no matter what the actual merits are, that's going to be a huge pitched battle, I'm sure.
Well, I know you're a big Caps fan. I know there's a big game 4 tonight, so good luck with that one. James Trusty, thank you.
All right, thanks. See you, Dana.
You were looking live at the White House press briefing room as Press Secretary Sarah Sanders, is set to take questions moments from now. We'll have that for you when she starts. And voters in many states going to the polls tomorrow. Do you want to know which races are the ones to watch? Well, I do, and Chris Starwell will be here, and he'll tell us.
The Republicans are highly motivated to make sure that we hold on to these seats. I take every single election very seriously, and I'm not doing anything differently this time than I have in the past.
Primary races heating up across the country ahead of the November midterms. 8 states holding primaries tomorrow, but California will be the main event. Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein will face 31 challengers, including 9 from her own party. Former state Senate leader and Sanctuary City pioneer Kevin De Leon looks to be her main opponent, but we'll see how that turns out. It's midterm Monday, so let's bring in Fox News Politics and halftime report editor Chris Starwell. I know California is quite interesting. Let's start with the Senate race there with Dianne Feinstein. She served many terms in the U.S. Senate. She decided to go for another one, but could this be one of her toughest elections yet?
Well, it will be her toughest election since the days when California was a politically competitive state between Republicans and Democrats. There was a lot of pressure from the left on DIFI and can't she do it? Remember, she's been there for 26 years, and California has moved substantially left, and her rightward lean on foreign policy, national security issues has been particularly vexatious for some liberals. De Leon has not been able to feed the bulldog. He, in polls, has not gotten there. And part of his problem is there are so many challengers. The vote is divided so disparately. What he has to hope for is that she wins, but not by, she doesn't get 55 or 60% of the vote, but in fact that there's more vote against her than for her, and then he can try to coalesce that energy and run against her again in November.
What about Republicans in the Senate race out there in California?
Oh no. Not even a little.
Not impossible. Okay, so then the other thing we're looking at is the control of the House and these midterms being really important for both parties. And in California, there are 3 districts, California 48, 49, and 39, where the Democrats were hoping to try to turn those red to blue. What are their chances like now that we've been talking about this California jungle primary system and the Democrats sort of basically too much of a good thing, too many candidates basically watering the others down, and in this system the top 2 vote getters get to go to the general election, and it could be that the Democrats get boxed out.
So there are 7 House districts in California where Democrats think that they could pick up ground. California is more central to Democratic hopes to retake the Congress than any other state. 3 of those districts are in Orange County, OC, baby. They're all there, and their hope is that they can flip at least 2 of them that look the most vulnerable. You've got Darrell Issa retiring, you've got Ed Royce retiring, then you got Dana Rohrabacher, whose own party is trying to push him out.
We have some cards showing them because people have known these 3 congressmen for quite a long time, but I understand that they are vulnerable. There's lots of different reasons why, and tomorrow night I guess we'll find out who's going to go to the general election.
This is true. It won't be either Issa or Royce. They're retiring. Rohrabacher, who's been in Congress since the earth cooled, the Republicans are trying to force him out because he's gotten pretty out there. So they're trying to push him out. The Democrats may get locked out, though, especially in the Issa district, if they don't get big enough turnout. So they're really pushing. Democrats are pushing hard. Get out and vote. Get out and vote. It's too late for them to get anybody off the ballot. Obviously, the election's tomorrow. People have been voting for a long time. Democrats need major turnout so that they get into the top 2. If they get into the top 2 in all 3 of those seats, they're going to make up some ground, and bigly.
So you surprised me this morning. You were talking about that you're actually starting to look at the South Dakota Republican governor's race. There's a primary there tomorrow. A recent poll shows Kristi Noem, she's a congresswoman from South Dakota, and Marty Jackley are virtually neck and neck, with Noem polling at 45% and Jackley at 44%. This is not a race that I was paying attention to. I did think Kristi Noem was probably a lock for that. I don't know why I thought that, maybe because I haven't seen much about that race, and I know of her, so I thought that she had it in the bag.
You have not been reading the Argus Leader enough.
I do love the Argus Leader, though.
But I can tell you that Kristi Noem, who of course has been elected statewide since 2010, is a popular congresswoman and was expected to move ahead at some point. She was expected to leave the House and either go to the Senate or run for governor. But Jack Leigh, who has, I believe, twice been elected as the state's attorney general, former prosecutor, this race now in South Dakota, they tend to be pretty nice. They tend to be pretty laid back. This has gotten quite sharp-elbowed. This has gotten quite rough out there as the two of them have sparred, and it's been I will say this, other states should take a look at South Dakota. The debate there has been remarkably unstupid, and it has not been about who is the most like somebody else, but they've talked about a lot of issues, but it has been intense, and it's going to be fun to watch to see who can pull this out tomorrow night.
And you had one other surprise, and that was that New Jersey, the Senate race there, you think it's a little bit more competitive than others might think. Could it be possible that a Republican named Bob Hugin could take on Bob Menendez, the incumbent, and win?
Well, I don't want to be too hard on New Jersey, but I will say that in most states, coming within a hair's breadth of the federal prosecutors, as incumbent Senator Bob Menendez did, and the things that Menendez admitted that he did, which were not very appetizing, that he admitted that he did in part of the prosecution. Yeah, he beat the rap. And prosecutors ended up not charging him. But let's face it, if things work out okay, and the reason Republicans like this Hugin guy is because he's a businessman, he's a self-funder, they don't have to spend a dime on this race. He's willing to go in and go toe-to-toe with Menendez. If it turns out Menendez is as unpopular as some people think he is, this could be a race, and we're going to be looking at that Democratic primary to see what support looks like for Menendez. How many dissidents are there out there in the Democratic Party that don't want to vote for Menendez?
Well, 5 months from tomorrow is the midterm election, so we're getting closer. Chris Stirewalt, thank you.
You bet.
2 decades after a scandal that almost brought down his presidency, Bill Clinton still getting defensive when asked about Monica Lewinsky. And now she's weighing in after comments like this.
You typically have ignored gaping facts in describing this, and I bet you don't even know them.
Fox News Alert, we are awaiting a White House briefing set to start at any moment. We'll take you there when it starts. This is Bill Clinton facing new questions about an old scandal. During his book tour, the former president was asked about Monica Lewinsky. Watch.
Through the lens of Me Too now, do you think differently or feel more responsibility?
No, I felt terrible then, and I came to grips with it.
Did you ever apologize to him?
Yes, and nobody believes that I got out of that for free. I left the White House $16 million in debt. You are giving one side and omitting facts.
Mr. President, I'm not trying to present a side.
You asked me if I agreed. The answer is no, I don't.
And I asked if you'd ever apologized, and you said you had.
I have.
You've apologized to him.
I apologize to everybody in the world.
Joining me now is Kristen Stolte-Sanderson, Republican pollster, columnist for the Washington Examiner, and author of The Selfie Vote, and Mo Alithi, former communications director for the DNC and a Fox News contributor. In one way, folks, it's like, it feels like it was a long time ago, but this moment in history in 1997, 1998 was quite consequential, and it is being looked at in a new context in the year of 2018. And how do you think Republicans looking at this, especially younger ones, Kristen, how are they looking at it? And is it different from how Democrats are, or is this all different because it's generationally different?
Well, I think the world has changed an awful lot in the 20 years since this story was first splashed across the headlines. In fact, the way that we think about sexual dynamics in the workplace, men and women, how they interact in the workplace has changed a lot in the last year with the rise of the Me Too movement. But that does not in any way excuse the behavior that Bill Clinton engaged in. And I'm frankly astonished this idea that he's presenting himself as a victim in this situation. There is only one victim in this situation. and that's Monica Lewinsky. And the fact that, people think of Bill Clinton as this fabulous politician, and yet he seems to be so mishandling this moment is just astonishing.
Well, he is, Mo, he has a new book out that he's written with James Patterson, and we've actually had James Patterson on the show later this hour to talk about that collaboration. But take a listen to what he said in that interview this morning when he was asked about Monica Lewinsky specifically.
You think President Kennedy should have resigned? Do you believe President Johnson should have resigned? Someone should ask you these questions because of the way you formulate the questions. I dealt with it 20 years ago plus, and the American people, 2/3 of them stayed with me, and I've tried to do a good job since then with my life and with my work. That's all I have to say to you.
Mo, earlier you saw in that first clip that Bill Clinton was asked if he had apologized. He said, "I apologize to everyone." But Monica Lewinsky just tweeted this from an article in Vanity Fair in which she said, this is from a few months ago, in which she said, "Though I wish I had made different choices back then, I stammered. I wish that you and your office had made different choices too. In hindsight, I later realized I was paving the way for him to apologize, but he didn't. He merely said with the same inscrutable smile, 'I know, it was unfortunate.'" I guess, you were the DNC communications director. I know you have a lot of thoughts about how to address something that is unpleasant and difficult to handle. How do you think he's handling it today?
I don't think he handled this interview particularly well. To me, it would have been an easy recommendation to him when the question comes, as it did from Craig in that first clip that you played. Do you feel differently about it today? He said, "I felt terrible about it then." Asked, did you apologize? Yes, I apologized then, and I apologize again today. My actions were inexcusable. He has said those words many times over the years. He should have said those words again today, full stop, rather than get into an argument litigating it. Look, the notion that Bill Clinton hasn't paid a price, I mean, one could argue being impeached was a pretty big price, but I agree with Kristen, he was not a victim in this situation. He should have just said, "I made a mistake. I apologize to her then. I apologize again today. Full stop."
And then be able to move on and talk about this book collaboration that he has. Kristen, the issue of hypocrisy comes up over and over again. And look, I think Chris Stirewalt says hypocrisy is what makes politics possible. But it is frustrating, right? So you see what happened in the late 1990s and even throughout the campaign in 2016 with Hillary Clinton being asked about her husband's past actions and their reaction to it at the time. Are the Democrats still dealing with a hangover effect of that decision back in the 90s?
I think so. I think this is a part of the generational divide that you mentioned earlier. I mean, we saw in the Democratic primary back in 2016 that a lot of young women in the Democratic Party had big problems with what they viewed as Hillary Clinton's either complicity or excusing of her husband's behavior, which so clearly violates these norms of how we think women should be treated in the workplace. And what you see is, and I think both parties are extremely guilty of this, of enabling and empowering leaders who they think you're an eloquent, articulate person, you can achieve the policy ends I want. So I'll excuse all this bad stuff that you have in terms of your character because I just want to see, see us get some political wins. And that's just, it's saddening and it's heartbreaking and it happens on both sides.
In the meantime, Mo, I've got to go, but I'm assuming you're watching with interest the midterms tomorrow.
Yeah, I think what we see coming out of California tomorrow could help decide what the actual battleground map looks like in the fall. So it's going to be a big day.
Well, we'll have you back to talk about that. Kristen Soltis Anderson and Mo Elleithee, thank you.
Thank you.
And later in the show, as I mentioned, I'll be joined by James Patterson, who co-authored the new novel, The President is Missing, with former President Bill Clinton. A gathering of dictators as North Korea reportedly invites Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad to visit Kim Jong-un. Why the announcement is raising concerns in Washington. Plus, President Trump sparking a backlash by slapping tariffs on our closest allies. Is a trade war on the horizon? I'll talk to Noah Rothman of Commentary Magazine on both these topics straight ahead. Fox News Alert, we are awaiting a White House briefing, and we'll have that as soon as it starts. But first, as preparations for President Trump's historic summit with Kim Jong-un kick into high gear, North Korean state media reports that Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad will visit Kim in Pyongyang. The purpose of the trip and the date are unclear, but Syria and North Korea have a strategic relationship going back decades. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin is live at the Pentagon. Jennifer, what do you think we should think of these reports?
Well, remember, Dana, this is North Korea's state media that announced the possibility that Syria's President Bashar Assad would travel to North Korea to meet with Kim Jong-un ahead of the summit with the U.S. president on June 12th. But the North Korean news report may be misleading and may be the result of North Korea's new ambassador to Syria misunderstanding what Assad said. The exchange of pleasantries occurred when the new North Korean ambassador to Damascus presented his credentials to Assad on May 30th. Assad reportedly said, "I'm going to visit the DPRK," but there was no indication as of when. The two countries have a long history, which came to light in 2007 when Israeli warplanes quietly destroyed what they said was a nuclear facility being built by North Korean scientists in Syria. The IAEA has since confirmed that it was a nuclear site. More recently, UN experts accused North Korea of making at least 40 shipments of chemical weapons components to Syria between 2012 and last year, breaking a UN embargo. Kim Jong-un recently met in Pyongyang with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, a key architect of the Iran nuclear deal. Kim Jong-un also has met President Xi of China twice recently, Dana.
And Kim Jong-un has reportedly shaken up his military leadership, and I wondered what you could tell us about those changes.
Well, all of this very curious when you look at these changes at the top of North Korea's military just days before President Trump and Kim Jong-un are slated to meet in Singapore. On May 24th, North Korea made a big show of blowing up tunnels around their nuclear test site with a few hand-picked Western reporters present. Now Kim Jong-un has replaced 3 top military commanders, including his defense minister and army chief of staff, with loyalists ahead of the summit. Experts say these are loyalists who may be more amenable to making concessions on North Korea's nuclear program than the older officers who are hawkish on maintaining Pyongyang's nuclear program. One of the new military leaders helped Kim Jong-un purge his uncle, so these men are among his trusted inner circle, Dana.
All right. Always interesting. Thank you, Jennifer. And for more on this, let's bring in Noah Rothman, associate editor at Commentary Magazine. Let me read to you something that the New York Times wrote today about this possible meeting between the North Koreans and the Syrians. Mr. Assad has been condemned by the West for using chemical weapons against his own citizens, and the possibility of his visit has mystified some observers. Hosting Assad, one of the worst butchers on the planet, as your first foreign leader visit is not a good PR move, one said. That's like putting it mildly. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think you can accuse North Korea of being especially concerned about its public relations persona. It has from the Western perspective, a very frustrating relationship with some of the world's worst actors. It exports weapons, it manufactures and exports narcotics, it exports nuclear material to places like Iran and Syria and elsewhere around the world, and even non-state actors. This is one of the reasons why North Korea is one of the focuses of American grand strategy and one of its security focuses for going back decades.
I think a couple of weeks ago you wrote a piece called basically asking the administration to call off the summit and to not do it. Now that things are back on track and perhaps maybe in a better frame of mind for going into it, are you supportive of the meeting?
No, I'm not, honestly, because I see a lot of public negotiation over what is supposed to be worked out at this summit, and that's not how summitry works. These things are very carefully scripted, and everybody should be on the same page as to what we expect. There should be no surprises at the summit, and when two principals meet without having clear objectives, without having a clear understanding of what we're supposed to achieve, it can result in a, quote, failed summit. Now, I'm not especially predisposed to say a failed summit would be a bad thing, because it probably wouldn't result in American concessions in the form of economic assistance and security guarantees for illusory concessions on the nuclear program. But at the same time, if that summit fails at such a high level, it might render lower contacts at a lower level moot, which could leave us towards the most catastrophic option.
Before I lose you, this is all happening while the United States is being real tough with our allies on trade. Listen to what Peter Navarro said about the U.S. allies that are retaliating against the tariffs. Listen.
What we expect is our allies, friends, partners to understand two things. One, that we have the right to do that in the interest of national security. And two, they need to look in the mirror at their own unfair trade practices. These are our friends, they're our allies, we engage strategically with them. But at the end of the day, this is a trade dispute, and the president is going to defend this country. He stands for American workers, and he's standing up for them now.
I understand it as a trade dispute, but is it a national crisis at the moment?
Well, the president had to invoke, in order to execute these tariffs, he had to label American allies, Mexico, Canada, and the European Union, as national security threats, as threats to the American national security, because that is the only authority he has to execute these kind of tariffs. I couldn't be the only American who felt a pang of embarrassment when the American president is on the receiving end of a lecture about the values of the free market and the threats of economic nationalism from the president of France. That's a little disconcerting to the extent to which French President Macron is, by the way, correct. These things, these actions do have the habit of creating a space in which economic reactionaries and nationalists can flourish.
Right. I know. Every overreaction could cause another overreaction. The president thinks, though, that this is good for American workers. We'll keep an eye on it and invite you back to tell us more. Thank you, Noah Rothman, everyone. James Patterson has a new book co-written by Bill Clinton, who's making some news today. And James Patterson, he'll be here next. Fox News Alert, we promised you the briefing. Here it is.
Economist. The economy has now grown by 2.8% during the first 4 full quarters of this administration, and we believe we are well on our way to reaching the level of growth the president has predicted. The American people do not believe this strong economy is fantasy or unrealistic. Just as he promised, President Trump believes in the American people and is putting them first in every decision. On North Korea, we are actively preparing for the June 12th summit between the president and the North Korean leader. The advance team in Singapore is finalizing logistical preparations and will remain in place until the summit begins. In the DMZ, the U.S. ambassador's delegation continues diplomatic negotiations with the North Korean delegation. Discussions have been very positive and significant progress has been made. Lastly, and most importantly, and speaking of great accomplishments, today is my husband's birthday, so happy birthday, Brian, and for putting up with me for all of this time. And with that, I will take your questions. Jonathan.
Sir, just a short time ago, the president said that I have an absolute right to pardon myself. Why does he think that, and does he also agree with Rudy Giuliani, his lawyer, that a pardon for himself would be unthinkable and would lead to immediate impeachment?
Thankfully, the president hasn't done anything wrong and wouldn't have any need for a pardon.
But does he absolutely rule out doing that? I mean, does he rule out ever issuing a pardon for himself?
Once again, thankfully, the president hasn't done anything wrong and therefore wouldn't need one. Steve?
How does the president respond to this criticism from Republicans about his tariffs against the EU, Canada, and Mexico? How do you reassure these senators and various people who are complaining about this?
Imposing the 232 tariffs protect the steel and aluminum industries because they're very critical to our national security. And for months, the United States has had discussions with Canada, Mexico, and the EU to find an alternative. Without an alternative solution, tariffs are the only measures appropriate to safeguard the country. We have strong relations with Mexico, Canada, and the EU, and will continue, and those will continue even though the tariffs are there. Ken?
Sir, what was the contents of Kim Jong-un's letter to the president that he received last week? And what did the president take away from that? Is he more encouraged based on receiving that letter?
I'm not going to get into the specifics of the letter, but as the president said, they were interesting, and we feel like things are continuing to move forward and good progress has been made, and we're continuing to prepare for the President's Summit. I can tell you the President has been receiving daily briefings on North Korea from his national security team, and I can also tell you the schedule for tentatively for that first meeting will be on June 12th at 9 a.m. Singapore time and take place at June 11th, 9 p.m. East Coast time.
There's a separate report that Vladimir Putin has reached out to Kim Jong-un and wants to meet with him. Is that a meeting that the president think would be constructive to this process? Does the president support Vladimir Putin meeting with Kim Jong-un as well?
Our focus is on the president's meeting with Kim Jong-un, and the president will make his views known directly to him when we're in Singapore, and our focus will continue to be on denuclearization. Mara.
Sarah, why the president tweeted that the special counsel law was totally unconstitutional. If that's the case, why is he allowing his own Justice Department to abide by it?
Look, scholars have raised a number of questions about the legality of the special counsel process. The president's made his views about the special counsel very clear, and the president knows that the special counsel isn't needed because, once again, he hasn't done anything wrong. There was no obstruction, no collusion, and no wrongdoing. However, we continue to cooperate.
He's never said the law itself was unconstitutional. How can he allow his own Justice Department to participate in something that's unconstitutional?
Once again, I addressed this. The scholars have raised a number of questions on it, and the president's made his views clear. Francesca?
Thank you, Sarah. I did want to follow up on that and try and figure out what exactly the basis was for the president's claim that it is unconstitutional. But I wanted to ask you about something else as well. EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt has been accused of enlisting taxpayer-funded staffer to not only shop for apartments around Washington, D.C., but also to shop for a used mattress from the president's hotel just around the corner. And I wanted to know if any of that gives the president pause at this point or causes his confidence in Scott Pruitt to waver.
Certainly looking into the matter. I couldn't comment on the specifics of the furniture used in his apartment. John? And certainly would not attempt to. John, go ahead.
Dwell on that for a second and let it sink in.
I'd prefer not to, but go ahead.
You said that significant progress is being made in the diplomatic talks in the DMZ between U.S. and North Korean officials. The big question here is denuclearization. The president would like it to happen all at once. He said that before, but that it could also be a phased-in process. I know that the meeting has yet to take place, but certainly they're trying to iron out some details here. Does it look like it will be in all at once, or is the phase-in more likely?
Look, I'm not going to go ahead and predict a meeting that hasn't even taken place yet, and I can't get into the ongoing diplomatic talks, but I can tell you that they've been positive, and we're looking forward to the meeting in Singapore. Stephen?
No matter what you're called, is maximum pressure still the policy of the United States toward North Korea?
Our policy hasn't changed, and as the president stated, we have sanctions on. They're very powerful, and we would not take those sanctions off unless North Korea denuclearized. Peter?
So let me ask you if I can. Does the president believe that he is above the law?
Certainly not. The president hasn't done anything wrong.
The question isn't if he's done anything wrong. I guess the question is, does the president believe the framers envisioned a system where the president couldn't pardon himself, where the president could be above the law?
Certainly the Constitution very clearly lays out the law. And once again, the president hasn't done anything wrong, and we feel very comfortable in that front.
I know, but you just a moment ago said it's not that clear. So I guess simply put, does the president believe he is above the law?
Certainly no one is above the law. Vivian, go ahead.
If I can't follow, just because I have
Sorry, no, I'm going to keep going right here.
I just want to ask you, this is an important one because it's about, I'll just keep asking if I can.
Peter, no, you can actually.
Well,
go
actually,
ahead.
I'm going to, Sarah. I think this is important. I haven't had a chance to ask this question.
I'm going to continue to move on.
Sarah,
thanks.
Right here.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Sarah, what's the status of the tariffs on China? Does the administration still plan to move ahead with the June 15th deadline, as they stated?
President Trump is taking steps to continue to reform the dysfunctional trade system that currently harms American workers and businesses, and the president is taking steps to protect U.S. technology and intellectual property from China's discriminatory and burdensome trade practices. We're going to continue in those negotiations. As you know, I put out a statement earlier this morning that those conversations continue. Brian?
Sarah.
We're going to keep moving. Go ahead, Brian.
Two quick questions. One, I've asked this before. Is there any chance we could ever see the president come out here and take some questions from us in this briefing room? And secondly, has anyone in this administration ever asked the president? Last week, you had on your agenda an agenda where you had lower jobs coming out, lower unemployment coming out, and you also had the Second Chance Act, I think it was. And instead of those, we had to respond to presidential tweets. Has anybody ever in this and this administration asked him to back away from Twitter just for a day.
On the first question, certainly you guys would be the first to know if the president comes out here, but thankfully he does address the press in a number of ways and in a number of venues, and we'll see if it happens here, and we'll certainly let you know. In terms of Twitter, the president uses Twitter to communicate directly to the American people. Frankly, you have the ability to choose what you want to write about, and you guys choose to write about things that the American people don't care about day in and day out, and that's a decision that you make, and frankly, I think it's the wrong one. Jordan, go ahead.
We have the opportunity to ask him a question about that, though, Sarah. Can we at least get an opportunity to ask him a question about what he tweets?
Thanks, Sarah. I want to ask you about the lawyer's letter to the special counsel. You said last August that the president did not dictate the statement about the Trump Tower meeting during the campaign, but the lawyers wrote to the special counsel that the president did dictate that statement. What's the reason for that discrepancy?
Like you said, this is from a letter from the outside counsel, and I direct you to them to answer that question. Deborah. Once again, you're referencing a letter that came directly from outside counsel, and I would refer you to them to answer that question. Deborah.
After Kim Kardashian's visit, thanks, Sarah, is President Trump considering a commutation for Alice Johnson, who already has served 21 years of a life without parole sentence?
The president's considering a number of different pardons and commutations, and when we have an announcement on that, we'll certainly let you guys know. John?
Thanks a lot, Sarah. Since Robert Mueller was named the special counsel over a year ago, the president's team, his legal team, the Justice Department has never challenged the constitutionality of the special counsel. And yet the president today is doing just that. Why hasn't either the Justice Department or the president's legal team challenged the constitutionality? They have the right to do so in federal court, and yet they haven't done so.
Again, scholars have raised a number of questions about the legality.
But specifically, those two entities have not done it. The president's own lawyers have not done it, Sarah, and they can do so.
You would have to ask them. I'm not here to speak on behalf of the outside counsel.
What about the Justice Department? Can you speak on behalf of the Justice
I
Department?
would refer you to the Justice Department. They have a pretty large comms team. They'd be happy to answer those questions. Steve?
Yes, Sarah, I'm wondering if the White House stands by the comments that were made by the U.S. ambassador to Germany, who said that he was backing anti-establishment conservatives to take power in Europe. Seems like a very unusual thing for a U.S. diplomat to say towards friendly countries.
I don't have any updates on that front at this point. Blake?
Let me ask you, turn your attention back to trade for the farmers out there who care less about the politics, who have to run a business every day. There was a farmer in Iowa who told one of our crews out there this morning, he said, it's hard to know which way to jump right now. As in, they don't know what decisions they should make for their businesses because of what is playing out here in Washington, here in China, NAFTA negotiations as well. What would you tell those folks out there who are trying to run these businesses, who are trying to make a decision on which way to jump right now?
Certainly, the president is trying to do everything he can to protect American farmers, American businesses, and he is negotiating with a number of countries, but also the president wants to make sure that we're ending unfair trade practices. The president has said that he wants to help protect farmers, and we're looking at a number of different ways to do that, and we're going to continue that throughout this process. Peter? Sorry, Mike, I'm going to keep going. Peter?
Sorry, Sarah, I just want to come back. In August, you said he certainly didn't dictate the statement. I wonder if you could tell us the basis of your comment when you made that in August, and do you think that still stands? Is that still an operative statement, or do you retract that?
Once again, this is a reference back to a letter from the outside counsel. I understand, but it's also pertaining to a letter from the president's outside counsel, and therefore I can't answer, and I would direct you to them.
What was your basis for saying it in August, though?
Once again, I'm not going to get into a back and forth, and I would encourage you to reach out to the outside counsel.
Sarah, Rudy Giuliani, the president's outside lawyer, said to the Huffington Post, in no case can he be subpoenaed or indicted. I don't know how you can indict while he's in office, no matter what it is. If he shot James Comey, he'd be impeached the next day. Impeach him, and then you can do whatever you want to him. Is that appropriate language coming from the president's outside lawyer to be talking about the president shooting Jim Comey in that that fashion?
You would have to ask Rudy Giuliani about his specific comments, but thankfully the president hasn't done anything wrong, and so we feel very comfortable in that. Josh, go ahead, Josh.
If I could ask a follow-up
Sorry,
question.
I'm gonna keep going.
If I could ask a
Josh,
follow-up
go ahead.
question. Who are these?
Not today, Jim. Go
Well,
ahead,
others
Josh.
have had follow-up questions.
They haven't actually. Go ahead, Josh.
They have had follow-up questions. If I could ask who these legal scholars are that you are
I'm going to
citing,
direct
that
the
would be
question
great.
to Josh. Go ahead.
If you're saying for one thing from the podium that it wasn't dictated by the president, and his lawyers are saying something entirely different, contradicting you, how are we supposed to know what to believe? How can we believe what you're saying from the podium if his lawyers are saying it's entirely inaccurate?
Once again, I can't